This is 5-Minute Power Platform. We're going to build fast and make things in Dynamics, Flow, PowerApps, Azure, and whatever else we can get our hands on. Today we're going to build this mobile app, Your Face, Your Fate. What this does is it uses the facial API to detect whether you're happy or unhappy. If you're happy, you're rewarded. If you're unhappy, you're sent to either be dispatched to the FORTRAN development team or the PowerApps team. So we're going to start with the PowerApp. We're going to then use Flow then to automate the connection to the Face API to see if you're happy or sad. If you're sad, we're going to then save that image in an image library, which is going to trigger a flow for the approval. If the approver's out of office, we're going to look at their manager and then use a custom approval action to decide if you're in FORTRAN or PowerApps team. And then if you're in FORTRAN, we're going to save all that to the on-premise gateway. So let's start by looking at what the SharePoint site we'll use. So it's going to group the images into 3 buckets: awaiting judgment, or someone that's been elected to the FORTRAN team, or someone that's been elected to the PowerApps team. And so let's start in PowerApps. We'll build ourselves a new mobile-sized PowerApp. We're going to name the screen Fate. Be sure to rename those screens. They matter for accessibility. Then let's go into the media, and let's add in our 6 media files that you can find on GitHub. So it's going to add in those 4 background images and the 2 sounds. So we'll drop an image on top, and we're going to name it image frame. Just trying to follow those naming conventions. And we're going to set then the image width and height to tie to the application. This is just part of getting ready for responsive designs, right? So these new capabilities that are coming to PowerApp. So we want to tie our width and height and our X and Y to other controls of the page. So we'll set that, we'll drag it over. We're going to set it to the base image, which is going to kind of serve as our foundation, although we'll be tweaking this with formulas later. And we'll put a camera on top and size it to about the oval of the frame there. Now the PC has a horizontal frame camera. We're targeting the phone, which is going to have a portrait size rectangle, so we'll ignore the white borders on the top and bottom. Now we're going to set the stream rate for the camera to 100. This allows us to then capture frames from some other control. Otherwise, you must use the onSelect from the camera itself. So for the base image then on the onSelect, what we're going to do is we're going to set a variable called var image to the camera stream property, not the photo property, but the stream property. And that way then when we click anywhere on the boundary, we should be able to check our variables, and we should see our image variable got captured there. So far, so good. So then we'll add an image to show that var image variable, to show the image that's captured. We'll call this image face, and we'll tie it to the camera's height and width. We're going to skip the X and Y for this one, but just again, trying to just make sure that all our control sizing are ready to be dynamic and just get into that habit. So once we have this on place, then we'll set the image to var image so that we can see the captured image. And now we're ready to then start capturing images. So let's make clicking on the frame act as kind of a toggle. So when I click it once, a captured image. If I click it again, it deletes the image. So we'll add an if statement around this. So we're going to say that if var image is blank, then capture the image. And so that's just that code we've already written. Else, clear out the image. And so we'll set the var image to blank. And that way then it'll toggle back and forth between setting the image and clearing the image. Kind of a nice easy UI. And so we can see there's my hand there, captured it, click it again, and it's live again. Next, let's reorder our controls a little bit. We want image frame to be on the top, so it's going to cover up the camera. So it looks like the camera's behind that oval frame. That looks a little better. And then we'll finally set an input box. We're going to give each person a name so they can get submitted. We can identify them. I'll call this text name. We'll remove the default text, put in some hint text so they know what to do here. And then let's also set the frame border to 50. We'll give it a nice round border. It's kind of unusual. And then resize it there. So let's save our app. I'm going to call this Face App recording. We're recording it now, and then we'll save it out. So now let's create the flow that's going to capture the image, send it to the Face API to SharePoint. So click on Action Flows, Create New Flow. And let's name this, we'll call this Fate Button Recording since we're recording it right now. Let's add our first action, which is going to be to create the file in SharePoint. So we'll type in Create File. We'll choose the SharePoint flavored version of this. We'll give it our site name and our folder path, which is called Fate. Select that there. And now we're going to ask in PowerApps for the file name, but also for the content of the file. Now let's first rename this so that we get a sensible variable name created. So we'll call this face image, and now we get face image file name, see more, face image file content. Now, there's a reason why we're putting the SharePoint action at the top, and that's because those will be created with the right data types. If you go create a variable and ask for those, you're not going to get the right data type, and I found this in a blog post that I'll reference in the description. Now, images that come in from PowerApps are in the wrong format. So let's create a variable that will then convert those. And so we'll do initialize variable, and we'll call this variable face image, and that's going to be of type object. And then what we'll do is we'll use the data URI to binary function. And what that's going to do is take it from the base64 version that PowerApp sends in and convert it to a binary file that's something we can read and view in SharePoint. So we'll feed the data URI to binary function the face image file content that we fed in from PowerApps. The next variable we're going to create is one for the happiness level returned from the Face API. But basically, it's going to be the part of the emotion detection algorithm and tell us if the person is happy or not. So we'll create this, initialize this variable as happiness. It is going to be a float, and we'll just set it at 0 to get started here. Next, let's get ready to call the Face API. We're going to use the HTTP connector, and this is how you connect to any third-party API. And then after that, we'll enter in the URI and the other parameters. Now, these come from the documentation and also from provisioning this in Azure. I've got a separate video where I provision this in Azure and create a key like that one I'm entering now. And I can link to that video in the description, but I'm not going to go through provisioning a Face API or an Azure Cognitive Service in this video. So content type, we're going to choose octet stream. For queries, we're going to do return face attributes, and then we're going to ask for a few of them, although we really only care about the emotion. We're going to ask for a few. And then what we'll feed in as a body is our face image that we converted to binary format. This is going to return JSON, and so we'll use the data operation for parse JSON next. And we're going to feed that then the body of the HTTP result, and we'll paste in the schema. Again, this came from the documentation for the Face API. So now then we need to set our happiness variable based upon the results that we got from the Face API. So we'll do set variable happiness. We'll set the value to the happiness returned from parse JSON. Now you'll notice it put an apply to each around this, and that's because there can actually be more than one face detected, and we're kind of just ignoring that for this particular case. So now we're going to put a control statement here, an if statement that says if happiness is greater than or equal to 0.5, that means they're happy. It's on a 0 to 1 scale when it's returned. We're going to respond to PowerApps with a value that says they are good. So we'll add a text output. We'll call the text output return, and we'll say good. And on the flip side then, if they are unhappy, we'll add a text output to return to PowerApps. And we'll also call this one return, and this one will be bad. Now we're also going to write out their image only if they fail the happiness test. So we're going to drag that down here from above and only write out the face image here. We're going to add .png to the file name so that it opens up as a PNG file. We're going to take out a parameter there because we want to send in the binary version of this to SharePoint. Otherwise, you won't be able to view the image for SharePoint. Now you notice variables aren't listed here at this case, but if you start typing variables, it will then start showing them. So we can just start typing variables. It'll show them, then we can click on it, add that in as a hack. Okay, let's save this flow and then head back to our PowerApp and put on a button that calls it. And so in PowerApps in, we'll insert a button. Let's update its text to do judge me. Let's also change its color so it looks a little different than every other PowerApp out there. Call it red, take out the border, and give it a border radius of 50 so it's round and kind of unusual. Then let's go into flows here, and we'll pick the fate button record flow we just did, and it needs two parameters. One is the file name, and that's going to be the name entered in the text name input box. And so we'll do text name.text, and also the image that we've got stored in our var image variable. All right, let's give this a whirl. So we'll move Dwight there. We'll snap his image. He looks weird, but fine. And we notice too that this image is popping up on top of the frame. So let's move the frame on top. Now it looks quite a little better. And then we'll give Dwight a name here, Dwight test, and let's call the flow. Now what we should see then is we should see that our flow ran here when we look at the details, and it looks like it all succeeded. And we should also see now that we have Dwight written to our SharePoint site there, and there he is. And you can see he's been given a value of awaiting judgment, which is our SharePoint default for this particular image library. So now we made our flow respond to PowerApps with good or bad, and so we need to start capturing those. So on select for the button, let's set a new variable. We'll call this var results, and we'll capture whatever came back from the flow there. So let's give this a quick test here. So we'll put our flow back, or our PowerApps back into play mode, and send the image and the text back over. And now when it comes back, we should be able to see that we got a new variable defined here, variables of our results. We can see the record has the property text, which is a little unusual, and then the result bad, which is what we would expect from Dwight. The other thing we'll notice that we don't have text, or we don't have an image captured, like if I take away the text here, the button will still work. So we need to put some validation on that. And so we'll do that by going to the button's display mode property. Right now it's always edited, it's always working. And what we'll do is we'll put a check in there. And so we'll say if either text name is blank or the var image, our image variable, is blank. If either of those is blank, then we're going to set this to display mode.disabled. Otherwise, display mode.edit. You can see it already went disabled there. While we're here, let's rename the button to button submit. And then we should be able to say, it looks like I got an image and it lights up. When I don't have an image or I don't have text, it disables, which is exactly the behavior we wanted. Let's also make it so that after we submit data, we blank out the text so that it resets it a little bit. So after onSelect, after the flow runs, we're going to reset the text name field, and that's going to blank it out and set it to its default state. So next, let's change the frame image based upon the result we get from flow. So right now, it's always going to be this base image. We're going to add that in later. But let's check our var result variable. If you remember, that had a text property. It was either the string good or bad. So if it's good, we're going to use the good image, which is the one that has kind of the sun rays on it. And then if it's bad, we're going to use the other image, which gives you the idea that you're going to choose between FORTRAN or PowerApps. And that's the image we have here for Dwight. So that seems to be working all right. So now let's cut that and let's add another if statement that's going to go around it. And that's if we're uninitialized. And so if there's no var result, if var result is blank, then we're just going to show the base image. Otherwise, we're going to show the if statement we just copied. If statement we just copied. So now let's go to the onSelect for the frame. And if we need to reset it, if it gets reset to take a new picture, we're going to reset the result as well. So we'll set var result equal to blank. And then it'll set us back to the blank frame so that we're kind of starting from an initialized spot. So let's try this again. So we've got an image in there, Dwight 2, we'll send it out. And if all goes well, we should have it come back and we get the right frame. So now comes the fun part, we get to add some sounds in. And so let's go to the insert menu into media and we'll add in 2 audio controls. So there's 1 and there's 2. One will be for the sad trombone sound, so we'll call this trombone, and the other one will be for the chorus sound, so we'll call this one heaven. And then let's assign to these their media files there on the right, and then this one as well. Let's give these guys a shot here. All right, yeah, that sounds good. And so now, to get media to play, what they do is they actually watch a variable and start on their own. So we're going to have the start for the trombone start when the var result text is bad. Oop, and I can hear from that I actually got the files mix match. So let's put the trombone to sad trombone. Let's put heaven to the angel sound. And then heaven is going to start when var result .text is good. And so they're going to control when they start on their own, which is a little unusual way for if you've been programming another language. It's not really how we think, right? But let's test it out here. So we'll do test with Grumpy Dwight, send it over, and we should see the trombone start. That's good. And as a bonus, we can see our images were added to SharePoint just as they should be. So let's set both those audio controls, turn the visibility off so they'll continue to work, but they won't show up in the user interface. And next, let's make our camera smart enough to know if it's on a mobile device or not. And so PC has 1 camera, mobile device usually has 2, right? A selfie camera and then a main camera. The camera property 0 in the PC is going to be the only camera. We're going to use the acceleration.x property, which is blank on a PC. It only exists on a mobile device. And so if the acceleration.x property is blank, we're going to use camera 0. Otherwise, we use camera 1, which is the selfie camera on a mobile device. So that way it'll kind of automatically switch to the selfie camera for us. We'll save this and we'll publish it. And then let's move on to our next flow, which is the one that's going to run the approvals for the images uploaded to SharePoint. So let's head over to flow. We'll create a new flow, an automated flow from blank. We'll call this one fade approval vid because we're recording the video here. The flow trigger is going to be when an item is created. We're using our image list here, and so it'll trigger when a new image is added by our other flow. So I'm going to set the site. My list name is fate. And then let's add a new step to set a variable for the approver. And so we'll do initialize a new variable. And we'll call this variable approver. Now the approver could be set by a variety of means. Let's rename this step here. So set approver. We'll set the string and let's initialize the approver just based upon the email address of whoever created the file. We'll just keep it simple. So now we're going to use the Office 365 connector and we're going to look up the out of office status by using the get mail tips action. So here in get mail tips for a mailbox, we'll put in the mailbox address, which is our approver. And that's going to return then a set of properties, and one of them is their out of office message. And So we're going to see if that out-of-office message is empty. So we'll use the empty expression here, and then we'll feed it the automatic message from the Office 365 mail tips. And so if that is true, if that out-of-office reply is empty, and in that case, then we're going to look up an escalation approver. And so we're going to use the Office 365 users connector to get the manager, get manager v2. All it needs is the approver's email, and that's going to give us back the approver's manager. In this case, that's the custodian, strangely enough. And so we're going to then update our variable for approver to be the email address for the approver's manager. So now we're ready then to route our approval. So we're going to use the new approval start and wait for an approval with custom actions. And so we're only going to do one approver, so we'll do wait for one response. Our first response is going to be FORTRAN, and that matches the option set in SharePoint. Our second one is going to be PowerApps. So those will be the two custom actions we're going to give our approvers. And so for the title, we'll just say weigh in on, and then let's see where our name goes into the file name. So just put file name with extension. We'll assign it to our approver, and then we'll just put in some random details here, like how about make some sort of judgment, or what say you? And then item link, let's search for the link to the item so you can look at the picture, and we'll give it a description. We'll say judge whoever this person is. There we go. And then finally, you'll see a lot of these where they'll do some sort of if statement after the approver. We just want to capture the approval action. So we're going to go just write it right back to our SharePoint site. And so we'll say list name is Fate, get the ID of the item, and then we'll write back the value here. So custom value, and this is going to be our response property, our single response for this one approver. And then we're also going to do the approver claims because the approver could have changed, and it even could have been rerouted within the flow approval because they can then delegate that approval to someone else. So this will allow us to capture who the final approver really was. So now let's test this out to make sure it's doing what it needs to. So we'll put this in test mode, and then we'll just do kind of a manual test by just dropping an image directly into our image library here. So we'll drop in Michael Scott, and we'll see here he goes from new items to awaiting judgment, which is the default value of that column. And we should also see here in our approvals, we see him flow up or flow in as an approval. We'll respond. We've got our custom approval action. We'll choose FORTRAN for him. And now we go back to our flow in test mode, and we should see it push forward here in a second. And we see that it went through an updated SharePoint, and there he is. Michael Scott's now in the FORTRAN group. So now let's go in and set my out-of-office message here. So we'll search for office messages or automatic replies. Turn that on. We'll put it in something meaningful here, and then save that out. And now let's test it again just to make sure that it escalates to my manager appropriately as well. So again, we'll take the flow, we'll edit that, put that back in test mode. We'll do just a manual test by dropping in another image into the SharePoint library. So this time we'll drop in Stanley. We'll see he gets added, he gets an awaiting judgment. And then we come back to the flow and test. We see that it started running, and now we're waiting for an approval. It got the manager's name, looks right. It's going to go into the custodian, and it's set our approval variable to custodian. Now it's waiting for an approval, and it should be in our custodian's inbox. So let's switch over there. And if I go into the flow approvals for the custodial engineer, I see I've got Stanley in there, and I can respond. Let's respond with PowerApps this time. And it gets processed. And we see that Stanley is down in the PowerApps group. So far, so good. Back in the SharePoint side, if we switch to thumbnails view, we can see that not only do we have the Fates captured, but we also have the approver captured too. So we can see that one's custodial engineer. So the last step to add to this is writing out the records that are chosen for FORTRAN out to an on-premise database. So I've got the SQL Server database here. It's got a few fields in it. So let's start by showing how to configure the on-premise data gateway. So you'll download this from Microsoft. I'll put a link in the description. And then you'll log in just as you would log in to your PowerApps environment using the credentials you want to connect to PowerApps or to the Power Platform. And so here I'll log in. And once we've logged in, then you'll see that it's connected to Power Platform. Now the first time you set it up, you'll also give it a name. I've given it the name D365 Philly here. So now this is ready to go, and we're ready to go into Flow and start building our flow that's going to write data to this database through the on-premise gateway. So we'll start by adding another action, and that action is going to be a condition. We're going to check to see if they were given the Fate FORTRAN, and so we'll check the response, and if it's equal to FORTRAN, in that case then, and only in that case, we'll insert a row into the database. So to insert a row into the database, we'll add an action here. We'll choose SQL Server, and then we'll choose the insert row action. We're going to connect via an on-premises data gateway. We'll give this connection a name. This is just something that we can reference it to. It'll be referenced in the data section on the left-hand side. And then we'll look up our SQL Server name here, and you see if we expand this a little bit, you can see that it's on-prem, and our database is Asset ERP, and our table is Fate. So we'll choose in SQL, type in the SQL Server name on-prem, the SQL database name asset ERP, and then we'll connect with the database credentials here. And you can see my gateway is set up there. It's already found the gateway that is installed in my on-premise server. It brought back a list of tables. I'll choose the table we care about. You'll see it'll give us a list of columns in that table. And so we can then just start mapping data across. So for the name, we'll use the file name with extension. For their fate, we'll choose the approval response. And for the upload date, let's just use UTC now from the expression menu. And then I'll just put in the date and time when this executes. Let's put this in test mode and give it a try. So let me save it here, and then we'll click on test mode and wait for it to start up. I'll perform the trigger action again by just dropping an image into our image library. So now that it's in test mode, let's flip over to our image library. Let's put it back into tiles mode so we can see the images. And then let's drop an image of another character in here. This time we'll drop in Aaron. And then we see Aaron here. It's going to pick it up. Looks like it ran, and now it's waiting for approval. It went to the custodian because I still got the out of office message on. And so we'll see here, there's Aaron, we'll respond. We'll choose FORTRAN because we want it to take the path where it's going to write it to the database. So that's done. Now we just watch the flow unwind here. We can see an update item. It looks like it passed the condition and inserted row into the database. So let's go over and check the database. Do an F5, and there we go. We can see Aaron at the very bottom. So that all worked. Okay, so let's do an end-to-end test in PowerApps. So I'll load up PowerApps here on the right-hand side. Let me refresh so I get the latest version of the app. It's going to ask for permission to get authenticated into SharePoint, use the camera. There's my image. It's using the front-facing camera because we set it to. So this one will be happy. So this one won't show up in the image library because the happy ones don't get posted to the image library for judgment. So we'll hit judge me. It's going to go out to the flow, out to the Face API, and evaluate my emotion. It should come back that I'm happy. There's the positive result that we would hope for. And so let's try one. We'll clear that out by tapping on the frame. We'll try a sad one now. So I'm going to do unhappy. Type in the name. Take a picture by tapping on the frame. We'll choose judge me. It's going to go out to the Face API. And this one should then appear behind us under awaiting judgment in the image library. So there's the response. There's the image. And so everything looks good. So now let's switch over to Flow, and we'll vote that unhappy image into the FORTRAN team. So there's weigh in unhappy. I'll select that. I'll pick FORTRAN as my response and confirm it. And we should see that image move behind us from the awaiting judgment row into the FORTRAN row. Let's see here. There we go. FORTRAN just bumped up to 10. Let me move this power up over to the left-hand side so you can see it. Now unhappy is in the FORTRAN row. And so now we should also see it in SQL Server. So if I refresh this query, we should see unhappy show up as a 6th row in the database. So let's hit execute, and there they are. So it looks like the flow is working. So there's one last path we need to test, which is the PowerApps one, right? The team that everybody wants to be on. So let's go back in here, take another unhappy picture. So we'll do this unhappy 2. Take that picture, and then there we go. And we'll send this over with Flow. And then we'll vote this unhappy person into the one cure for their unhappiness, which is putting them on the PowerApps team. So there's my verdict. Go over to Flow. There's unhappy 2. Choose PowerApps and confirm, and we should see that person head down to the PowerApps row. And there it is. I hope you enjoyed this kind of silly scenario that I put together. My goal was to show you these things listed here by these bullets, which are things that people frequently ask about or things that I had trouble with and thought I would show you so you didn't struggle with them. This is a shortened version of a demo that I'm going to give at 365 Saturday coming up soon. If you want to see more speakers and more events that are near you from 365 Saturday, follow that URL on the right. Thanks for watching.